Before, yes, I guess, before we open for general discussion, it is my duty to report that the previous chair said that I would be the first one to ask a question, and I think we should respect his wishes. So I will dutifully ask the first question, and then we'll open for discussion. This is going to be quick. Sure. I was surprised by the way you responded to Stu's so-called easy knowledge problem. I thought you would give him an entirely different response, and I want to know what's wrong with the one that I expected, which is a way to understand the easy knowledge problem. Now, I think Stu is not going to concede the point that the problem there, on an intuitive level, of course, is with the closure step. I mean, as you yourself grant, there are many occasions in which we will accept that somebody knows the table is red because it looks red. And I think you would only add the no defeater clause there, and I think Stu expected that anyway. So he just skipped that part, perhaps. So I think he should stick to his guns in that regard. So that's a bit puzzling to me. Now, my problem with that is, and this is the response that I expected, is because I think the so-called easy knowledge problem is just the old zebra case. I mean, what's new? Do I miss anything, or is this just the Dretskian zebra point again? And for that, you do have a reply, actually provided reply in 1995, and you would have said, yeah, so this is Peter Klein, 1995, if memory serves. You would have said, well, look, people are usually confused, or maybe that's what Dretski did. Maybe Stu is doing that right now. Tend to confuse the principle according to which if I have a reason R for P, which is a good reason and justifies P, presumably, and P implies Q, then the very same R is my reason for believing with justification that Q. And of course you said, well, but that's refuted by the zebra case and one of Robert Audy's examples and all that. And when I read the paper, I didn't see any reference to the zebra case. I don't know if you added that, or maybe I just missed it, or if you added that in your handout. But it's there now in the handout. And that's how I see the so-called easy knowledge problem. I wonder if it's the very same old, is it old news and new packaging? That's how I see it. And so I think you understand what's the expected reply to that. Surprisingly to me, you want to question the legitimacy of the first step, whether I can come to know that the table is red because I believe, supposedly justifiably, that it looks red, and I think that Stu shouldn't concede that point, because at an intuitive level, it is the closure step that really matters here, and I don't see that you have dispelled that impression. So that's my question. I think it's as much for Stu as it is for you, because maybe I don't understand the easy knowledge problem. But it looks to me like the old zebra case. So what's wrong with your previous reply to that? Is anything, or maybe I just didn't get the first reply in the first place?
I don't know if the way to think of this is that if I'm right today, then at least I'm right, even if I was wrong before, and if I'm wrong today, then at least I was right in the past.
That's my question.
Or is it that I'm wrong on both occasions? Okay. Well, in the paper I do talk about the zebra case. And what I wanted to do was to show, in this paper, was to show the move from the animals are zebras to the animals are not cleverly disguised mules. Is not a difficult step at all. In fact, I lose information from moving from the animals are zebras to the animals are not cleverly disguised mules. And what I was claiming was that the seeming problem is that it looks like in the consequence of the second step that I'm gaining some information about whether these animals are disguised or not, or that I'm gaining some information about the lighting conditions. And what I was saying was you don't gain any such information at all. What you gain is it's not the case both that the animals are zebras it's not the case that the animals are mules and cleverly disguised. You could also get it's not the case that the animals are mules and not cleverly disguised. You can put anything you want inside of the negation sign. Now, I think there's a further thing wrong. So that's something that I think both the zebra case and Klohn's red table case have in common. There's another thing they have in common, or at least there's another thing that Dretske says explicitly, and I don't know whether Stu would buy it or not. And that is Dretske says, when he does the zebra case, he'll say, well, what reason do you have for thinking that the animals are not cleverly disguised mules? And then he says, you can't use the reason you use to get to the animals are zebras, because that reason has been discredited. And it looks like what he's saying in that case is that he's using that he's taking closure to entail past two cases. That in order for to be justified in believing X when X entails Y, you've got to have some reason, which is a reason for X, if and only if it's a reason for Y. And all I said in that earlier paper was, look, that isn't what closure is committed to. That's too strong a requirement. That would be sufficient for closure to hold with regard to that pair of propositions on that occasion. So I'm willing to say I'm right both now and then.
That's what I thought. Okay.
I'll concede that much.
Stu.
I have a question about your solution to the easy-knowledge problem.
Imagine.
But before I do that, I just want to clarify my position, because I think there is a misunderstanding in the way you presented it. So there's this reasoning that I imagine I present to my son. I say, well, he wants to know how I know the table isn't white with red light shining on it. And I say, well, it looks red, so it's red, so it's not white with red light shining on it. And you say, I take that to show there's something wrong with the step from it's red to it's not white with red light shining on it. But then you say, what my son is really questioning is the step from it looks red to it's red.
I hope I didn't say the first thing. I did say that the son is questioning the first step.
That's what I meant too. So what did you think I was... Let me explain how my argument goes.
Yeah.
The argument is it's a reductio, right?
Yes.
So intuition, maybe you don't have this intuition, and then the argument doesn't work. But the intuition is, I can't respond to my son in that way. I can't say, it looks red, therefore it's red, therefore it's not white with red light shining on it.
I share that.
Okay. Then I say...
Wait.
Let me just finish how the argument goes. Okay. Then I say... Then given the compelling closure principle, there would be nothing to stop me from going to it's not white with red light shining on it. So that step can't be what's wrong. So it has to be the first step from it looks red to it's red. That's the problem. So that's precisely the step I meant to be questioned.
Okay, good.
Okay.
And I guess my response is that if your son, this I have in the paper, but since he was sitting here, I thought it would be impolite to read it. But if your son really is obsessive like his father,
he is, unfortunately. Thank God for Paxil.
Then I think your response to your son should be, son, you're just being obsessive. You've got no reason for thinking that tables looking red is not a good reason for thinking that they are red on this occasion. Now, if your son, depending on why your son is questioning, if your son is just being obsessive, then I think you should respond by saying, look, you don't understand how reasoning works here. Reasoning is ampliative. You can move from it looks red to it is red to it's not
Well,
white.
then it sounds like you don't have the intuition that there's anything wrong with that reasoning.
Well, it depends on why he's questioning it.
Suppose he just wants to know, he says, he has no doubts that I know what I claim to know. He just wants to know, how do I know it?
Oh.
How do I know?
Well, that's what I was... good. How you know it is not simply on the basis of that reasoning. You know it in virtue of reasoning and there being no defeater. And so you would have to explain to your son that knowledge doesn't arise simply on the basis of defeasible reasoning. It has to be defeasible reasoning that isn't defeated.
But I don't have to know it's not defeated, right?
No, you don't.
Okay, so the reasoning would be fine then. I could simply say, it looks red. I don't have to have as a premise that there are no defeaters. Because if I had to have as a premise that there are no defeaters, then we don't have basic knowledge anymore.
If you're going to claim that you have knowledge, you have to make the claim there are no defeaters. And the question is, I took your question to be, can the knowledge arise on the basis of this kind of reasoning? And I take the answer to be, well, that kind of reasoning satisfies the justification condition, all right, but it doesn't satisfy the knowledge condition. And you'd have to explain that you don't gain the knowledge in virtue simply of having that reason.
Look, suppose he just says to me, explain to me the reasoning by which you came to the conclusion that it's not white with red light shining on it. And I say,
go ahead.
Simple. It looks red, so it's not white with red light shining on it.
That sounds to me fine. That does explain the reasoning. That doesn't explain why it's knowledge, but that explains the reasoning, all right?
And, see, I think he would be very puzzled, and rightfully so.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether, you know, he thinks...
if he's just obsessive, if he really is just obsessive...
well, wait, look, now, the obsessive, that's not essential to the example, right? I was just adding a little levity into an otherwise boring paper. But, you know, he says, is that a white table with red light shining on it? And I say, no. Oh, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Well, it looks red, so it's not white with red light shining on it. That's almost child abuse to me.
No. Look, if you accept that it's up for grabs, that it's a white table with red light shining.
It's not up for grabs. He's not questioning it. He just wants to know how I get it at the conclusion.
Well, you explained how you got it as a conclusion. Yeah. And that's a correct, it's a correct explanation of how you arrived at that conclusion. But if he's asking you, can you really know on that alone, Dad? And your answer should be no. Because if you know something, the reasoning has to be as good as that reasoning is, and it also has to be such that there's no true defeater.
So you're committed to denying KK then, right? Because...
Oh, yes.
Okay. But you think that would be a sufficient... I guess then... I think that's...
It would satisfy my son.
I think I think it's a version of just biting the bullet on there, but maybe just something that's a big bullet. I've taken up too much time already.
Okay. Rick Kimmerton?
Well, so I mean, it wouldn't be an accurate description of any sort of sane person reaching the conclusion that there aren't distorting lighting conditions, right? Nobody's going to...
Right, and that's not a conclusion you can come to.
Well, yeah.
No, that's not included. What's included is it's not the case that it's white
red
and being illuminated by a red light. You get no information about the lighting conditions.
If you don't know that there are no distorting conditions, you wouldn't be in a position any longer to think that it was right.
Say it again.
That it was red.
Say it again.
If you weren't in a position to know that the lighting conditions were not unusual, I mean, if you didn't have reason to believe that, you certainly wouldn't have reason to believe on the basis of it's looking red that it is red. Look, think of the skeptic this way instead of the way you're thinking of the skeptic. You've got these contrary hypotheses, alternative hypotheses, all of which you would agree are logically consistent with the appearance. Now, it depends on what you think the reasoning is that you think is the good reasoning that gets you to the claim that the thing's red. Right? What the skeptic supposes is, well, you can't be reasoning inductively because that's not going to work. Or maybe you're using some kind of argument to the best explanation. You keep shaking your head. No, it's not that, it's not that.
No, I mean by a red table a thing which typically appears red. I mean, what I mean by a red table is something that typically appears red. I mean by a red table the kind of thing for which I have...
So is Berkeley's God, who is just typically producing in you red appearances, that's enough for the table to be red?
No.
Because you just mean by a real table, whatever it is.
There's a clear defeater there.
What's the defeater?
There's no table.
I thought you meant by red table whatever it is that produces the red appearance. So if it's a mind, it's a mind. What the heck? That'll do.
Yeah, this is the discussion we had earlier. I guess it's going to get difficult quick. I'm not sure whether table in the mind of God is easily translated in Berkeley's language to table in my language, and whether we're really disagreeing about anything here, or whether it's just a semantic variance.
Make it pants. I mean, just come up with some weird hypothesis instead of individual objects. They're little-minded creatures of different sorts corresponding to tables and chairs and the like. It's an intelligible hypothesis. It's consistent with the evidence. If you're trying to reason to the best explanation, the skeptic wants to know why that hypothesis is any worse than the hypothesis you think is true. And you owe the skeptic a non-question begging an account. Now, if you think instead that from appearances you can just automatically infer your choice hypothesis, then you should, as Stu mentioned, employ closure to reject all the alternative hypotheses. But it's the oddness of doing that that suggests that you don't really think you can move to some simple epistemic principle from how things appear to how things are, not without seriously begging the question against what look like all sorts of respectable alternatives.
I think on some occasions you can easily move from how things appear to how they are when the probative value of reasoning is not up for grabs.
Well, yeah, but it's up for grabs because the skeptic's questioning it, right? The skeptic wants to know why the alternative hypotheses, which seem just as reasonable given the evidence, aren't just as reasonable. Now, maybe if you gave a positive account of how seeming red does make it likely that the thing is red, what's the positive reason?
That's how things are. Things are such that red things are such that they
And you discovered this how?
By looking.
Well, wouldn't a Keynesian know that? Wouldn't a Keynesian know that? No? Keynes? How would a Keynesian...
A Keynesian with overly ambitious aims at finding probability connections might claim that. And if you could, I mean, if that were one of the probability relations, then you should just employ closure and get on with the business of refuting all the alternative hypotheses.
No, I don't think you can. Let's distinguish between what I call ordinary incredulity and skeptical doubt. Ordinary incredulity is when the son says, look, Dad, I know that stores have lighting conditions in them that distort the real color of things. Things in stores, especially when you buy clothing and things in stores don't look the same as they do out in the sunlight. And so if you want to buy something, some clothing, then, take it out in the sunlight, see what it really looks like. Or maybe the son overheard Stu saying, I'm going to tell him I'm going to get a red table. But I'm going to this fancy store that has a whole bunch of white tables. They're so much cheaper. I want one of those. So if the son has a reason for thinking that the light conditions may be abnormal, you can't reply to him in the way that, it looks red, therefore it is red, therefore it's not white being illuminated by a red light. That would be an inappropriate response. But in a case where the probative value of how things look is not at stake, then you can do it. Then that leaves But I'm not saying that you can always employ closure to get to eliminate any alternative you want. Depends what's up for grabs in that circumstance.
Okay, Paul Bogosian?
How soon do I get off this?
Another 15 minutes. Yeah, we have about 15 minutes. I'm sorry.
More easy knowledge, Peter, but this time about the bootstrapping.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Hunches can be wrong. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, I think it replicates some of the same.
Okay.
But, I mean, first of all, we have to get the issue about color out of the way because, I mean, establishing the reliability of your faculties is about establishing that that things are the way they look. So we don't want to be testing that vis-a-vis a property that's just a looks property. That is, if your notion of what it is for something to be red is just that it looks red.
No, that's not my notion.
No, right. But so let's just pretend that. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think objects really have colors, but let's just.
That's why it reels in quotes all the time.
Right.
All right.
But we just pretend that they do have colors.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're just wondering whether this kind of basic knowledge allows too easy a substantiation of the reliability of your color vision. Okay. Now you're saying, look, what's the problem? I established this track record to say I can see whether the object is red, and I can see whether I believe that it's red, and so I established this track record of that's the basis for saying that my color vision is reliable. But all of this is defeated by the observation that whether or not your color vision is reliable, you'd come to the same conclusion because you're basing it on the fact you're going to believe that it's red just in case it looks red, right? And you're going to conclude that it is red just because it looks red. And so no matter what color the object has, you're always going to arrive at the conclusion that your color vision is reliable.
I think there are two different kinds of becauses working there. I come to believe that it is red because it looks red. That seems to me like a causal because. It's not my, if you ask me why do I believe it, I'll give you a causal account, and that causal account will be, well, because it looks red.
Just think of the question, what are the circumstances when you're performing this kind of first-person test of the reliability of your color vision? When you're performing this kind of experiment about the reliability of your color vision, what are the circumstances under which you would conclude that you're not, in fact, reliable?
Suppose I discover in myself the belief that it's green, but it doesn't look green and it isn't green.
Yeah, but why would you conclude that it is green if it doesn't look green?
I wouldn't. But you were asking. When would I discover? Look, I take it I have access to my beliefs. I can introspect my beliefs and find out what they are, and I have access to how things look, and how things look give me reasons for believing how they are. Okay.
Right. And what we're doing
so what I can do is I can look at my beliefs. I have access to that, and I have access to how things look, which gives me a reason for believing how they are.
That's what's being disputed. The idea is that we take a collection of things that you believe to be true, and we generate an absurdity from them. Okay. So here's one thing you believe, that the mere look of the object, color, okay, gives you a reason for believing that it's got that color. Okay, that's one thing you believe.
Yes.
The other thing you believe is that
it's a defeasible reason, right? Okay.
We're only talking about defeasible reasons. The other thing you believe is that you can introspect what your beliefs are. Those two things together seem to suggest that you can now establish the reliability of your color vision.
I think I can.
I know. But my point is this. Stands in conflict.
Can I establish the reliability of your color vision?
Hang on one second. We're going to try to generate an absurdity out of it.
Okay.
And you're supposed to let him.
Okay.
Only if the topic interests you. But here's the thing. Suppose that I'm in fact extremely unreliable about the colors of objects. The object is purple, but it looks green to me. Okay? The object is blue, but it looks yellow to me. Okay? I will nevertheless run this experiment to establish. What do I conclude? I conclude I am reliable because, you see...
I think you should, but it's defeated. You don't know it. Of course you should do
No, okay, but I have... But according to you, I'm justified in believing that my color vision is reliable on this basis.
Yes.
And this is supposed to sit in tandem with the fact that I would arrive at this conclusion whether or not I was extremely unreliable. Even in circumstances when I'm extremely unreliable.
There are circumstances where your test you could fail your test.
Yeah.
You could look and look again and always
Right.
get the wrong color, or you could
Right.
look and check it.
Right. But let's imagine this.
No, the Paul's point is that you would have to find that out, that you failed by some other means. And I think it's right. I mean, you get testimony, like reliable testimony, and then oh, voila.
You could fail Peter's test. You could. Because the only comfort is you could pass Peter's test and still be unreliable. But it's not the case that there's no way of failing Peter's test. Right? In a single case.
Okay, but the best thing to talk about.
Let's talk about the single case. And I think you are justified in believing that you're reliable. And I think in the case that you're talking about, you'd be justified in believing you're reliable. Of course, you wouldn't have gotten knowledge because there's a defeater. And I gather we're not talking about what would justify you in believing something. And I take it if you look at the third-person case, where you can determine independently what the belief is and what the color of the object is, you can see they do or don't line up. Now, if they always line up in the third-person case, so for some reason you get the belief wrong, or you get the actual color of the thing wrong, you'd still be justified in believing the person was reliable, even though you wouldn't know it, because there'd be a defeater.
Now, I have David here.
I want to talk about testing reliability.
Okay, but if you just say, on his view, if I do it once, I've got some evidence.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
In the
That's
single
right.
case. Yeah.
That's what you do.
David?
I had three questions, Peter. I'm going to...
Oh, gee.
No, one. How about one?
Okay, I have a two-part question. No.
The best one. Just give us the best one.
You have a three-part question.
I'll only
I
ask one of them. I'll ask the other two.
Ask the easiest, will you?
Actually, one of them was about easy knowledge. That's the one I won't ask.
Oh.
Enough about that for now. This is about academic skepticism and whether the academic skepticism there's a kind of skeptical argument that relies on closure. You want to argue against that, I thought, that skeptical argument can't rely on closure.
No.
Okay.
I wanted to argue that this thing that people take to be the standard argument either doesn't rely on closure, or there's no way to motivate the second premise if the skeptic thinks it's path 3. So I wasn't claiming there was no argument.
Okay.
In fact, I was willing to grant there could be an argument for the second premise that didn't, what I say, that didn't beg the question. But if the skeptic, in other words, there could be an argument for the claim I'm not justified in believing the skeptical hypothesis is false. But the skeptic can't...
You think there's a skeptical argument that relies on closure? You think there's a skeptical argument that can't be given but with closure?
No.
You think there is no skeptical argument that can't be given but with closure? Any skeptical argument that didn't need closure?
I think there are skeptical arguments that don't rely on closure, and that they may be plausible.
I know that.
Okay,
You
say
think
it again.
there's no skeptical argument that does rely on closure?
Well, there are such skeptical arguments that appear to rely on closure, and the skeptical argument that I gave does rely on closure if they think path 3 is the appropriate epistemic priority between the propositions.
Yes.
Whereas if they think it's path 1 and path 2 that is the reason why the first premise holds, then it doesn't rely on closure. You reach the conclusion that you're not justified in believing that M without employing closure at all.
This may really not matter at all. Let me skip ahead, because I think we're probably just going to get distracted with that. I'm worried about the argument you give against whatever it was exactly you argued against. I thought it was against the need for closure principle, but never mind about that.
Okay.
We think about this argument that a skeptic might give, the standard argument. And then you mentioned that there are three paths that, one of which, in some sense, must hold. That is, it must be a case that there is either an epistemic priority of relation between x and y, such that x is prior to y, or that y is prior to x, and that neither is prior to the other. That seems right. That seems exhaustive.
Okay.
And if there's precedent enough. Now, and then you say, I'm imagining a skeptic who has, let me just make it simple. Imagine a skeptic who does not believe, who believes that there is a priority relation of some sort, either the null one or one or the other. Okay. But doesn't believe of any of them that it holds. So does not believe that x is epistemic prior to y, does not believe that y is epistemic prior to x either, and also does not believe that they're on a par. Doesn't believe any of them, but believes the disjunction of the three. That's the skeptic I have in mind. That skeptic, I think, cannot give their skeptical argument except with closure, or at least can give a skeptical argument with closure that they cannot otherwise give. And I think it's not unreasonable to be in a position in which you think that a disjunction, a tripartite disjunction holds without having any belief in it. I mean, think about bipartite disjunctions. I believe that there's either an even number of grains of sand in the Sahara or an odd number of grains of sand in the Sahara. But I don't believe that there is an even number of grains of sand in the Sahara, nor do I believe that there's not. Now, imagine a skeptic who thinks, certainly there's some epistemic priority relation between the proposition that I have at hand and the proposition that there's no skeptical scenario in place. Okay. I don't know what it is. So I'm not going to take path 1, and I'm not going to take path 2, and I'm not going to take path 3. Instead, I'm going to give you the standard argument.
But you must, okay. I think I understand that, but why isn't this an adequate response? Look, you must think that one of those three holds. You're not going to commit yourself to which one it is. Well, if it were the first one, then the argument you would have to give for the second premise, grant me for a minute, would beg the question. If it were the second one, then the argument you would have to give for the second premise would beg the question. If it were the third, you could have no reason for motivating the requirement that I have to eliminate the skeptical hypothesis. So you must think if it's one of those three, then either your argument begs the question, or, because it's either one or two, or if it's three, you don't have a way of motivating it. That looks like you ought to give up, because you're committed to either your argument, whatever it is going to beg the question, or you don't have a way of motivating the requirement that I eliminate the skeptical hypothesis. So you must think one of those three things is true. Isn't that enough for you to say, well, then there's no reason to accept this conclusion, because whatever argument I give you is going to either beg the question or I don't have a reason for the second premise.
Except for the one that I can give if I don't accept any of the three paths, which I can rationally do. That's exactly the point. In other words, you can say, were I to accept path 1, the argument I would give, if I accept this, I'm granted for the sake of argument, that was one of my second questions, by the way, but were I to accept path 1, my argument would be, I wouldn't need closure for it. Were I to accept path 2, my argument would need closure, and were I to accept 2, something else would be true. Now you say, therefore, you already should know that your argument commits the disjunction of those two things, the thing that happens with path 1 or 2 or path 3. You might say, no, my argument doesn't, because I don't accept any of the paths. Instead, I offer you an argument based on closure. So here's what closure does to the skeptic. Enables him to give an argument without taking a stand on epistemic priority relations. So the answer, when you ask the question, closure can provide no help to the academic skeptic in pursuit of her argument, in pursuit of an argument for global skepticism, the answer is no. Closure can provide help to the skeptic, in particular to the skeptic who has no opinion as to priority relations between propositions such as I have hands and there is no skeptical scenario. in place?
I have to think about that. I don't quite know how to respond. I agree that a skeptic. You agree that if the skeptic accepts premise one, the closure premise, then the skeptic must think one of those three paths obtains. In the particular case when whether I'm justified in believing that the hand is up for grabs. And you agree, suppose it were the case, that all three of them beg the question, no matter which one. Then you still would say, I think, okay, I realize no matter which one I choose, but I refuse to choose. That's the strategy? Oh, no. I don't know what to say. That's a good question.
Ram? No? Paul?
I just wanted to ask about this, what I took to be this kind of curious idea, I'm not sure I'm understanding it right, that if a skeptical scenario is true, it would be impossible to have a reason to believe this. This makes it sound like, so imagine the traditional all-powerful evil demon who really gets a lot of utility out of deceiving me all the time.
Yeah.
It seems to me, if he wanted to play with me a little bit more, and say, I'll give Kelly just a glimpse of his real situation, give him a little piece of evidence about how things really are. He ought to be able to do that. I mean, it would be surprising if the all-powerful evil demon couldn't do that. Is there supposed to be some kind of, I mean, wouldn't your claim kind of deny that that's possible?
So the evil demon, I'm thinking of,
Look, it's not like, I mean, I'm so far away from believing this, it's not like I'm going to lose my illusion, so just to play with him a little bit, I'll throw him a bone and give him a little piece of evidence how things really are in the midst of all this misleading evidence.
But then you wake up in a cold sweat and say, I mean, the strangest things are happening in dreams. No? Don't you?
well, let me see if I can find how Descartes answers that kind of thing at the end of the sixth meditation. If I can find the damn thing. He's wondering, well, look, don't we dream sometimes? And that's like getting some evidence that the skeptical hypothesis that maybe I'm dreaming all the time is true. And what he says at the end, I wish I could find it here. I will in a second. Maybe I won't.
Page 10.
Is it page 10? Thank you. Okay. Yes. So he says, I ought to set aside, he's now summarizing where he stands at that point. I ought to set aside all the doubts of these past days as hyperbolical and ridiculous, particularly that very common uncertainty respecting sleep, which I could not distinguish from the waking state. For at present, I find a very notable difference between the two. Inasmuch as our memory can never connect our dreams with one another or with the whole course of our lives, unites events which happen to us while we are awake. And as a matter of fact, if someone, while I was awake, quite suddenly appeared to me and disappeared, as fast as the images do in sleep. So if I caught a glimpse of this brain in the vat, so that I could not know from whence the form came or whither it went, I would not be without reason that I should deem it a specter or phantom. And so what I would say in that circumstance is, gee, I just had a really fascinating hallucination.
But you might think that surely the evil demon could eventually inform you, right? Changes his mind. I've been doing a terrible thing. So I'll let you know how it's been. In order to get started on that project, it seems like he's got to be able to give you a first little piece of evidence that you've been deceived up till now. So I don't see how it could be that, right? I don't see how you could always discount, how it could be impossible for him to begin this process by giving you one piece of evidence that you'd always say, no,
that would be a second nightmare, isn't it?
Well,
second nightmare?
Yeah. So it's like what you're envisioning is Unger's kind of case, where if somebody says, look, I have power over your perceptions. You're going to wake up in Alaska in the next second and see an ice flow, and boom, it happens. And then the voice says, and you don't believe me yet? Now you're going to wake up in
it's not that
Cincinnati.
you'd be just suddenly justified, right? It's not that the evidence, the first piece of evidence that we
you're
strong
claiming
suddenly
it's some
justify
evidence.
you in thinking, oh yeah, I've been a victim of an evil demon. It's rather that it could be a little piece of evidence that we've seen, but it's not important. I was just curious about this idea.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess in that case, I mean, do you look in a mirror and you don't really look in a mirror and see anything, right? So you can't say, look, the reason for thinking I'm a brain in a vat is I looked in the mirror the other day and saw, looking back at me, a brain in a vat. You're going to have to have some other story to tell there, all right? And I don't see how that's evidence that you're a brain in the vat. That's
No, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Gee, no.
what Paul just said, the source that's telling you you're a brain in a vat is also making all kinds of predictions
Right.
and being confirmed
Right.
by your experience. So
Right.
credibility of the source is thing.
Right.
Very quick last question.
Yeah, just really quick question about easy knowledge again, Peter.
Okay.
Normal situation, I'm in the zoo looking at a zebra. Am I justified in believing that that's a zebra?
Yes.
No, okay. I'm a good enough logician to know that that's a zebra implies, even if all the other zebra-looking animals in this zoo are not zebras, that one is.
Yes.
So if I perform the deduction, am I justified in believing, even if all the other zebra-looking animals in this zoo are not zebras, that one is?
Yes.
I am?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to see if you accept that comment.
Okay.
Thank you
So
all.
would I also be justified in believing?
Yeah. I mean, you're not making a claim about what the animals really are.
Yeah.
You're just saying it's not the case, both that this thing is a zebra and the other animals are not. It's not the case,
Right.
both. That's all. It's just disjunctive addition that you're doing. It's a fancier one. It looks worse, but it's just disjunctive addition, isn't it?
So, yeah, that's right.
Oh,
So
well.
I'd also be justified in believing in the personal reliability case.
And I'd also be justified in believing that all the animals, anything you want. I mean, that the capital of Ohio is Cincinnati.
In the personal reliability case, I'm justified in believing, even if vision always misleads me, except now, it doesn't mislead me now. Even if vision usually misleads me, it doesn't mislead me now. I'm justified in believing that also.
Yes.
Okay.
Now here's a horrible scenario. A bus driver who's really mad at us, waiting outside. Thank you all.